What's going on, visionaries? Jason Osborne here, and today we're going to be doing some editing. First things first, before we even get started and hop into Lightroom, I want to make sure that one, if you are watching this, that you have the most recent version of Lightroom. There are going to be some things that are included in the most recent version of Lightroom that may not be included in your version if you haven't updated it in a while. So make sure you do that first before even continuing to watch the video. Also, it's important to note that I'm going to be using Lightroom Classic. That is the desktop version of Lightroom for your computer. This isn't going to be Lightroom CC or Lightroom Mobile, but feel free to leave a comment in the section below if you do want me to do a tutorial on Lightroom Mobile or Lightroom CC as well. So now that we got all that out the way, let's go ahead and hop into Lightroom and we can get started. So as you can see right here, I'm in Lightroom. This is a completely raw image straight out of camera. And up here, you're gonna find the basic information of the type of photo this was, the settings that I shot it at, etc., etc. So this is just the file name. CR3 is Canon's new RAW format. So that means I did shoot this in RAW. I shot this at 1/250 seconds, f3.5, ISO 100. I had a 24-70 2.8, and I also shot this zoomed in at about 35 millimeters. Now, the very first thing a pro is going to do, or at least what I'm going to do when I edit a photo, is go ahead and get the crop and the leveling correct. Now, why is this important? Well, it's basically important because it's going to allow you to really enhance and set the composition of your photo. And I'm looking at the overall aspects of this photo, and basically to go ahead and crop in Lightroom, you're going to hit this square right here, this crop overlay, and that's basically going to bring up a grid. Now, as you can see in this corner right here, this is kind of slanting out. And for me, that's gonna kind of trick the eye into thinking that it's not level. And that's not straight. Even though if you look at this side right here, it looks pretty level and it looks like a pretty level shot. If you want to post to Instagram, you would go ahead, and if you come over here to this little lock, it'll have all these different sizes that it'll automatically crop to. Instagram maximum crop is just 4x5, 8x10. So just because I know a lot of photographers will be probably watching this and using these tips to post to Instagram, I'm gonna go ahead and crop to that right there. And as you can see, it cropped down. I'm gonna go ahead and unclick this square, and boom, there you go. Now, how do I fix this slant in the wall that's kind of throwing everything off? Well, I can either rotate the image to match that slant in the wall, which obviously didn't do anything, or what I can do is just simply crop it out so that it's not in the image at all, which is what I'm going to do with this image right here. Now, as you can see, this photo doesn't have any slants in the wall, and it looks like a pretty level shot, and you gained a little bit more real estate as far as zooming in and adding some more detail and quality to the shot. Also, you can hit auto right here, and this button will automatically straighten a photo if it feels like it's crooked. But as you can see, it thought that this seam right here was the actual line it should be going to, and it rotated improperly. So I'm going to take that off, and then I'm going to straighten it back out so that it lines up with the floor instead of the wall. Cool. Now, once you have that done, you're gonna hit your tone section right here in Lightroom. Now this is gonna control all of the light, the shadows, the whites, the blacks, the highlights. This is something that can really bring out or enhance your photo. Now, this photo right here, as you can tell, is already pretty well exposed. I did use off-camera flash for a little fill, and then I also had some natural sunlight coming in as well. Now, the number one thing that I like to do before I even play with exposure or anything is to go ahead and boost the contrast. As you look at this photo, it can seem like it's a little washed out, like she's kind of just you know, almost fading into the background. There's not really that much separation. Contrast is gonna help with that. If I go over here and I boost this up, you can see that the darks and the lights are starting to separate, and she's starting to get a little bit more separation from the wall. And that's the kind of look that will really give your photos a professional style and appearance. So I'm gonna boost this up to right here. And as you can see, you know, now, you know, the highlights on her face got a little stronger on her shirt, down here on her boot, but we can fix that because we shot in RAW. So the next thing to control all the bright spots, you know, on her shirt, on her face, down here on her boot and on her dress is the highlights. Now, if you take this and you bring it down, you'll see that all of a sudden, everything has kind of come back into a good exposure. And that's also another power of shooting in RAW. The fact that you're able to do that. If you shoot in JPEG, you're not going to be able to get that kind of power control by saving the photo or reducing some of those highlights that seem pretty harsh in the photo. So I'm going to bring it down, not to kill all of the highlights, but just to reduce them so they're not so strong. Exposure, I'm going to leave it where it is, but simply for those who don't know, or maybe you're a beginner and you're just not sure, exposure is just going to simply darken or brighten your photo. Shadows is something that I feel is very underrated to be edited. I typically will try to increase shadows before I try to increase the exposure. So I will go to shadows, and depending on the mood, if you want it more moody or if you want it a little bit more, you know, happy, you can increase or decrease the shadows to bring some more detail in. And now detail is important because if you look at her hair, you can see when I lower the shadows, that detail in her hair goes away. When I bring the shadows up, they come back. So it really depends on personal preference and the style of edit that you're gonna go for. But for me, I'm gonna leave it right about here. I think this is a good photo that's gonna evoke some emotion, some mood, and I want a little bit more of a moody edit. The whites and the blacks, typically I leave alone, but basically they control exactly what their names are. This is gonna control the whites, meaning everything on her shirt, the highlights, and the blacks are the same thing, the darks and the shadows. Now presence is texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, saturation. Your texture is pretty much gonna be, you know, all of the things that you can see on a model's face, in her hat, the wall. You increase the texture, the finer that detail becomes. You decrease it, the softer it becomes. Clarity works similar, but for me, since clarity and texture kind of do the same thing, I'm gonna go ahead and leave texture alone and just boost the clarity up just a little bit. Now, here's an important tip to remember. When you're working with clarity, don't overdo it, all right? Sometimes you can go a little too far, and I've even made this mistake when I first started shooting and editing portraits, because you think it looks kind of cool and it's making your picture super sharp. But when you bring your clarity up, it just does too much to the photo, and it's very obvious that the clarity slider was used a little too much. For me, in my portraits, I don't go above maybe 10 or 12 when I'm using the clarity slider. So right now I'm gonna leave it at 10. That's all I need. Dehaze is what's gonna be able to save a shot when you're shooting outdoors, for example, and you have a little bit too much sun flare or too much haze from a sunny day in your shot. Now, it kind of does this by increasing clarity and also increasing contrast and giving you a little bit more detail, but it can also backfire as far as adding way too much saturation. So for example, if I boost the dehaze up, you can see that it basically looks like I'm using the contrast slider. Now, it's not really doing too bad of a job here, but if I was outdoors and there was a lot of color, a lot of sun, you would see the differences that I'm talking about. Because it's actually adding to the moodiness of this edit, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it up right about here. Now already, if I hit Y on my keyboard, you can see the differences between the original photo as it came in and how it is right here. And I haven't even gotten into color grading or any of the other amazing things that you can do with Lightroom. So these are just some of the things to think about if you really want to give your photos a good amount of pop. So vibrance is kind of like the fine tuning of how much color is going to shine through in your photo. And saturation is overall the increasing amount of color in the photo. I know that might not make sense. So basically, vibrance, I always typically just give it a little boost, add a little bit more color in there. In saturation, if everything looks pretty good, I leave it alone and I don't necessarily touch it. Now that's a personal preference, and that's something also that you have to remember as a photographer. Editing, a lot of it is personal preference, okay? You want to develop your own style, you want to be able to put out a picture that you're proud of, and you want something that reflects your vision. But at the same time, there are things that can be overdone. So, you know, if you think boosting the saturation up and having it like that looks amazing, then by all means, go ahead and put it out. But you might catch a little flack from your peers as far as having a little bit too much saturation pushed in there. But having a little bit more saturation than what the photo came with is nothing wrong with that at all. So you know what, just for editing's sake, I will boost the saturation up just a little bit. Now, I know the tone curve is very intimidating for a lot of photographers because they just don't know how to use it. They don't know what it's used for. Every time they do try to use it, it never works out. And typically I've learned that less is more with the tone curve. And it might not be working out with you because you're just trying to do too much. So how the tone curve works is basically up here on the right hand upper corner. This controls all the brights, all the highlights, all the super whites of the shirt, the highlights on her face, you know, down here controls all the darks, all the shadows. This gray grid is representing pretty much where most of the data is for the image. So we have a kind of a moody edit. So it makes sense that most of the gray is toward the left down here. Now, typically, I don't always use the tone curve, but for this photo, I will, just for example. Now, you've probably heard of the S curve by now, and the S curve is basically putting 3 dots, one in the middle, one right here, and one right here. And then basically, you're moving one of the dots, and the rest of the curve is gonna adjust with it. And people like to do this because it adds a little bit more contrast to the photo, a little bit more pop. For me, I will leave it right there, and that's all you really need to do. I basically use the tone curve a lot when I'm just trying to adjust the light in a certain aspect of the photo. So in the middle right here, those are the mid-tones. So if I want to add a little bit more a little bit more light to her hair, or you know, her hands, or maybe down here, without having to increase the shadows by all the way, I can go ahead and click the middle dot and just simply raise it up a little bit. And as you can see, those parts of the mid are getting a little bit brighter. Now, for Lightroom, you can also use this to control colors. As you can see right here, you have blue on the shadows, yellows in the top. So if you want to bring yellows into the picture, you're going to slide it down to the yellow. If you want to bring blues in the picture, you can bring it up top. Every color, you know, has its own spectrum. Same thing with purples, greens, reds, and greens as well. Now, I typically don't use the colors for the tone curves because there's tons of other ways to add color into the midtones, the highlights, and the shadows without actually having to use the tone curve. A lot of people do, but it's just personal preference. For me, I don't. So now you have your hue, saturation, and luminance, your HSL color panel. And these things right here are very important because they can help you color grade your photo. Now, there's a little button right here, and if you're ever curious on what's registering, you can click it and hold it over the photo. And then if you look back at the actual sliders, it'll start highlighting the color that it's detecting, allowing you to then click on it and then control that color by itself. For me, I'm gonna go ahead and not use this and just go ahead and use the sliders. It gives me a little bit more control. Saturation, once again, if I want to take all the yellows out, I can do that. If I want to add more yellow in, I can go ahead and do that. And you want to really color grade to the actual, feeling of the photo. Obviously, the viewer can tell that there's natural sunlight hitting and coming in due to the reflection down here on the floor. So, they're probably going to expect this photo to be a little bit warmer than it would be cool. So I'm going to go ahead and increase some of the yellows in this shot. Also, if I want to change the grade of yellow, I can go ahead and go to the hue and then, you know, switch it to, depending, maybe it gives a little bit more of a peach type yellow, or maybe more of a yellow lime type yellow. I kind of like the peach, so I'm gonna bring that right there. Now, obviously, if there's aren't any colors that aren't present in the photos, like there's not really any blues or any aquas, you know, it's not really gonna change anything. We do have some reds, and I'm gonna leave them where they are. Now, the color grading, Lightroom has incorporated these color wheels, and these are cool, and they've given another aspect to Lightroom as well. And basically, this is gonna allow you to basically edit certain aspects of the light in the photo. So this is once again what I was talking about when it comes to the tone curves. So basically, this is gonna be highlights, shadows, and midtones, or midtones, highlights, and shadows. How you use this is, we'll start with the midtones, is you can bring it all the way out to see what it's going to affect first. So as you can see right now, and the color purple, all the midtones are being shaded that color. So then I can rotate the wheel and see what I think will look best to color the midtones. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and color the midtones a little bit of a opposite color of yellow. So let's go with some of the blues. And then, because I don't like how much saturation is, I'm gonna bring it in toward the center to just decrease some of that saturation of blue in the midtones. Once I have it the way I let go. And then I continue to do that with the shadows and the highlights. So you want to use complementary colors. So if I use blue for the midtones, maybe I'll go with yellow for the shadows, and I'll decrease that until I get a good saturation that I like. A little less than what I want. That's good. And then for the highlights, same thing, complementary colors. What am I gonna do? Let's see. I think I'm gonna go with a cooler color for the highlights. Go with the purple, see how that looks. Actually, I'm gonna go with the green. A greenish color, another warm color for the highlights. And as you can see, that pretty much, you know, color grades the different light aspects of the photo. And if you want to see what it looks like, click the eyeball without it, and then you'll be able to tell what it actually looks like before and after. Once again, hitting Y, look where we are right now. Completely raw, color graded, and exposure used. Now, if you want to blend it so that it seems more uniform, come down here to blending, and you can click Alt, and it'll show you all of it together and where colors are being, you know, used on the highlights, shadows, and midtones, and how it all blends together. You can increase the blending, or you can decrease the blending. For me, I'm gonna keep it a little low, and I'm gonna keep it so that the highlights are being hit where I want, the midtones and the shadows are also getting the color that I want. And then same thing with balance, you can do the same thing. And basically it's gonna, you know, pretty much go between the darks, the shadows. As you can see, the shadows was the color yellow, so if I go to balance, that means all of it's gonna be yellow. And the highlights, and that was kind of a green color, so all the green. So basically you want the balance to kind of reflect both sides of the spectrum. And I'm gonna go with something like that. Boom. Now sharpening, great tool to use, help you save some effort when it comes to you know, giving your quality, you know, raising the quality of your photo up. All right, so we're gonna go right here. Already a pretty sharp photo. I usually don't go above 80 for sharpening, and as you can see, that even looks like it's too much. It was at 40, now 80, a little bit too much. Radius and detail I typically leave, Now masking is a great tool, and I always use it. Everything that is black in the photo is not being sharpened. Everything is white in the photo is being sharpened. So as you see, as I increase the slider, if the masking is the whole entire photo with zero masking is being sharpened. But then as I increase the slider, it starts to hone in on certain aspects of the photo, and that allows you to control things and also use more sharpening without it looking over sharpened. So I'm gonna bring this mask all the way up. I don't need the wall to be sharpened. I don't need the chair to be sharpened. I just want her to be sharpened, and that looks pretty good. Once again, everything that is white is sharpening is being applied to, and I leave it like that. Now noise reduction is basically how, if you're shooting in low light and you get that grain in your photo, that's how you can get rid of that, by using noise reduction. Now we don't really have too much noise in this photo, so I'm not gonna have to use any of that. Remove chromatic aberration. I always check it even if there isn't any, and enable profile corrections. Now this will allow the Lightroom to go ahead and fix any weird distortions that lenses might have. For this photo, you can see that it kind of took some of the vignette away from her. The profile, the lens will show up right here. So this is 24-70. So I kind of like it without it. So I'm going to turn it off and just keep it going. Down here for transform, this is also another way for you to level your photo. I typically like to hit the auto button just to see what will happen. And then as you can see, it didn't really do much. It actually kind of got it wrong because it's still trying to go for this side of the wall. So I'm going to turn that off and go back to the way it was. Now you have a post-crop vignetting. That's how you kind of like draw the eye in. Because this shot kind of has that painterly look, and I want the eyes to be focused on her right away, I'm gonna increase the vignette just a little bit, give it more of a moody look. You can also increase how round the vignette is and how sharp the vignette is too. So no feathering, you can see it's a spotlight. With lots of feathering, it blends in a little bit more and it's less noticeable, which is what you want. So then down here, what you have is your color calibration. And I like to do this to add some more color into the photo. Typically I like to rock with the blue and the green primaries. And I'll come down here and I'll slide it just to see what kind of effect it'll have on the color. So as you can see, the blue will add a little bit more red into the tone of the skin. We don't want too much. So I'm just gonna leave it at -4, and then I'm gonna go to the green, increase that a little bit. As you can see, it gave her a little bit more of a peachy tone, cooled the photo off a little bit. And I'm gonna go ahead and leave that at about 6, 7. So right now, we've totally transformed this photo. We've gone down the whole entire editing module of Lightroom, and we've touched on exposure, color, tone curves, cropping, pretty much everything. But there's a couple of things that you can really do to your portraits that are gonna allow them to pop. And these things are specific to portraits, so hopefully they help you out. First thing we're gonna do is focus on the eyes. So I know this photo isn't a close-up portrait, but you can still do a little work on the eyes. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna zoom all the way into 300%. And it is a little pixelated, but it's still good. And what I'm gonna do is first I'm gonna whiten the eyes. And you can do this in Lightroom by going to the adjustment brush here, going to actually this menu, and then going to teeth whitening. Now it's very important to note that just because you have a tool that has a specific name to it doesn't mean that it has to stick to that actual name. You can actually use this tool to whiten teeth and also whiten the eyes of a model. I like to whiten the eyes of the model because it allows me to see exactly where she's looking, and then I can also connect with her as far as viewing the photo. Just brings out a little bit more emotion in my opinion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit O on my keyboard so I can see exactly where the effect's being applied. And if you ever have these pins that might get in your way when you're trying to do fine-tuning edits, you can just hit H on your keyboard and it'll hide them. So once I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and start coloring the white of the eyes and make sure that they're covered in red. And the red is basically where the teeth whitening effect is being applied. Now you want to be sure not to overdo it, by brightening them too much, because then they're going to look like X-Men glowing. But, having a little pop to the eyes always helps a portrait in my opinion. So now I can take O off and zoom out. And you can actually see a little bit better as far as where she was looking, and you can actually identify with the model a little bit better. Now for the actual eye, I'm gonna go ahead and go to Iris Enhance. That's why I love Lightroom, because it has tools already that you're pretty much gonna be using. So now I'm gonna go to hit New, go back to the menu, hit Iris Enhance. And basically, I'm gonna do this and I'm going to color in just the bottom half of the eye. I'm not gonna do the entire eye because light is reflected through the bottom of people's eyes, if you didn't know that. So to give it a more realistic look, I only do half of the eye, not the entire. I take off O, there's a little bit more shine to it. We're gonna zoom out, and there you go. So another thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play around with bringing some more detail into her hair. And how I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna go to the adjustment brush, I'm gonna go to shadows, and I'm just simply gonna paint over her hair a little bit. And as you can see, her hair and the detail is still coming back. And I can control that by increasing or decreasing the slider right there. Using the adjustment brush is a powerful tool because it allows you to identify, select things in your photo and edit them. Now, another thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of this outlet and power cable that are on the wall. Now, typically you would think you would need Photoshop to do that, but you can actually do it in Lightroom. Lightroom has made a lot of advances in their object removal. So I'm clicking the spot removal tool right here. I'm gonna go to click clone. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna increase the brush size just a little bit, and I'm pretty much just gonna drag across. Now, as you can see, it pretty much took another place, this wall over here, and replaced it right there. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna pick a different section of the wall that matches with it. And I'm gonna use that right there. I'm also gonna increase the feather so that it blends more seamlessly together. Now, when you increase the feather, obviously some more of it's gonna, show through, but that's okay. I'm gonna hit H on the keyboard. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Not that much. And then I'm just gonna finish it off by doing that. Zooming out, seeing where that took from. Bring it right above. Excellent. And then I'm gonna zoom in again on the power outlet. Hit H on my keyboard so that doesn't affect the other ones that I've done. Lower the brush a little bit, and I'm just gonna go ahead and see what that gets me. Not too bad. See if we can do it again. That's really not bad at all. A couple versions of Lightroom ago, that probably wouldn't have been possible. But it really has made a lot of stride. So now that that's pretty much taken care of, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and just spot check some spots so that it doesn't look so apparent that something might have been there. And I'm also going to go ahead and see if I can get a little bit more of that. There you go, something like that. So once again, before, after, before, after. So what else can we do? Well, what we can do is we can actually add a little bit more light coming into the room by using the graduated filter. And you're gonna go ahead and click on this rectangle right here. And if you see, it's gonna pretty much show what's being affected. And then what you can do is you can increase the exposure just by using this tool. And then you can increase the warmth to give it a little bit more of a warm glow. Bring it down just a little bit. And if you don't want it to hit the actual subject and you want it to be around the subject, go ahead and hit your Alt key. Actually, first you're gonna go to Brush. So you have Edit, go to Brush. Then you can go to Erase. and basically it's going to allow you to erase the effect from where you don't want it to be. So once you have it where you want it to be, if you don't like it, you can always get rid of it. And then you can also use the radio filter, which is one of my favorite things to do. And you can get rid of the graduated filter, and you can put a circle over your subject. O to see what's being affected. If you want a little bit more affected, go ahead and decrease the feather amount. Everything outside of the circle is being affected. Everything inside of the circle is staying the same. Put it just like that. And then if you want to, get that kind of like painterly spotlight look, go to exposure, and then you can bring that down. I think I like that a lot better. And then say the shadows and the floor, you want to brighten that up a little bit, go back to your graduated filter. And go to exposure. And increase it a little bit. And there you have it. Edit like a pro. So there you go, guys. This is my editing tutorial with Lightroom, how to edit like a pro. As you can see, there are tons of different ways that you can get a great edit out of Lightroom. You don't have to use Photoshop. There are definitely advantages to using Lightroom that are a lot faster and easier than Photoshop and not as intimidating. Lightroom is a very underrated program in my opinion, and I think that it can give you amazing results as long as you just know the program and know the direction that you want to go in. As you can see right here on the before, it's kind of washed out, straight out of camera, and then we added mood, we added depth, we added sharpness, we added clarity, we added color, we added all of the things that make a professional edit and really will bring your portraits to life. So I really do hope that you learned something today when it comes to Lightroom editing and how to edit like a pro in 2021. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And this is Jason Osborne. I will see you in the next video. Peace. Oh, one last thing I can't forget, I do play Call of Duty Warzone. I told one of my guys that I play with a lot that I give him a shout out if he got, a certain amount of kills. I'm not going to embarrass him to how many kills I told him he had to get because, it's not that many, but he did reach that number. So Rob Martin, here's your shout out. Appreciate it. Make sure you bring that same heat every time we get one of those lobbies. All right, bruh? Peace.